Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. Today's story is titled The Contract Bride Who Refused to Be Silent. It is a story about a woman who agreed to a marriage she did not believe in, and a billionaire who thought emotions could be negotiated. The rain drummed steadily against the tall glass walls of the Lexington Hotel in downtown Chicago. Inside, the marble lobby gleamed under golden light, filled with the sound of soft jazz and footsteps that echoed like secrets. Behind the reception desk, Claire Evans tried to steady her trembling hands as she folded the last of the guest invoices. Her shift was ending, but her life outside these walls was falling apart. The eviction notice in her worn purse had given her 3 days to pay, and her mother's medical bill on the kitchen counter had doubled again. She had stopped counting how many nights she skipped dinner just to make the rent. As she looked out at the street where rain pooled in silver puddles, she whispered under her breath, "Just one more night, Claire, you can survive one more night." That was when the elevator chimed and a man stepped out tall, composed, every movement deliberate. He wore a dark tailored suit that probably cost more than her yearly salary, his cuff links glinting like small stars under the chandelier. Claire recognized him instantly. Ethan Ward, the billionaire CEO who owned the hotel chain itself. He was supposed to be in New York for a board meeting. What was he doing here? He walked straight to the counter, eyes calm but unreadable. "Miss Evans," he said, his tone formal but quiet, "I need a favor, and I will make it worth your while." Claire blinked, unsure she heard correctly. "A favor, sir?" Ethan slid a plain white envelope across the marble. Inside, she glimpsed a legal document, crisp and heavy with signatures. "I need someone to stand beside me as my wife for the next 6 months, he said. "Call it a contract marriage. Your name will clear the scrutiny I am under, and you will be compensated more than fairly." Claire stared at him, her heart thudding. This had to be a joke. A billionaire offering marriage to a night shift receptionist? Ethan's expression did not waver. He added quietly, "You have every reason to say no, but I also know about your mother's hospital situation. The foundation I chair could cover her treatment. I am not asking for love, Miss Evans. I am asking for cooperation." The air between them thickened. Claire felt anger, confusion, and something else she could not name. How did he know about her mother? Had someone told him? She drew a shaky breath and whispered, "Why me?" Ethan looked at her for a long moment before answering, "Because you are invisible to them. They will never suspect you." Claire's stomach twisted. She wanted to walk away, to throw the contract in his face, but her mind replayed her mother's voice, weak over the phone, asking if the hospital would still keep her until next week. She closed her eyes, fighting tears. This was insane. But desperation had a sound, the soft click of her pen signing her name at the bottom of the contract. When she opened her eyes, Ethan was watching her. "Welcome to our marriage," he said simply, his tone almost kind. Claire's voice trembled as she answered, "I guess that makes you my husband, Mr. Ward." He gave a faint smile that did not reach his eyes. "For now, yes." The storm outside deepened, thunder rolling through the city as two strangers sealed a deal that would test not only their patience but their very beliefs about love, power, and silence. The following morning, the city was painted in cold gray light as Claire stood outside the Ward Enterprises tower, clutching the same envelope she had signed just hours ago. Her reflection in the mirrored glass doors looked like that of a stranger. The woman staring back wore borrowed confidence and a wrinkled uniform that still smelled faintly of hotel detergent. She had not slept. Every step she took inside the marble lobby echoed louder than her heartbeat. The receptionist greeted her politely, but there was a flicker of surprise when she announced her name. Claire Evans. The system already listed her as Mrs. Claire Ward. She felt a tremor of disbelief run through her. How could her entire life have changed overnight with just one signature? She was escorted to the top floor, where Ethan's office stretched across the skyline like the deck of a ship. He stood by the window, suit jacket off, sleeves rolled to his elbows, staring out over the city as if it belonged to him. When he turned, his face was calm, almost detached. "Good morning, Mrs. Ward. I trust you read the conditions carefully." Claire hesitated before answering, "Yes, I did. I still do not understand why this must be so formal." Ethan moved closer, handing her another file. "This outlines your obligations. 5 public appearances, beginning with the charity gala next Saturday. In return, your mother's medical expenses will be handled through the foundation." Claire opened the file and scanned the typed words. Clause 1, no personal questions from the media. Clause 2, appearances must be consistent with a loving marriage. Clause 3, maintain discretion. Clause 4, do not speak unless addressed. The words hit her harder than she expected. Do not speak unless addressed. It was there in writing, black ink binding her silence. Ethan watched her reaction. His tone softened, but only slightly. "These rules are for protection, Claire. The board will look for any excuse to undermine this arrangement. You must be perfect, quiet, invisible." She closed the file and lifted her chin. "I can follow rules, Mr. Ward, but I will not be invisible." For the first time, his eyes flickered with something human surprise, maybe even respect. "We will see," he said simply, and walked toward the adjoining conference room. The next few hours were a blur of contracts, stylists, and assistants. A woman named Grace measured her for dresses, clicking her tongue as she pinned fabric around Claire's shoulders. Another taught her how to walk in heels without looking terrified. Her old life felt like it was being peeled away layer by layer. By late afternoon, Claire stood in front of a mirror wearing a pale ivory dress that fit her perfectly, though she hardly recognized the woman in the reflection. Grace smiled approvingly. "You clean up well, Mrs. Ward." The title still felt foreign, heavy in her chest. When she left the tower, the wind whipped through the streets, scattering yellow leaves across the pavement. Her phone buzzed. A message from the hospital, payment received. Treatment approved. Claire's knees nearly gave out. She pressed a hand to her mouth, tears stinging her eyes. Ethan Ward had kept his word. That night, she sat by her mother's hospital bed, holding her hand while machines hummed softly around them. Her mother looked fragile but peaceful. A faint smile curved her lips. "You found a way, sweetheart. I knew you would." Claire nodded, unable to speak. She had found a way, but at what cost? Outside, the city lights shimmered through the window like a promise she could not trust. Meanwhile, in his penthouse high above the river, Ethan poured himself a glass of whiskey and looked at the contract again. He had done the right thing. The board would see stability, the press would stop asking questions, and the foundation would stay under his control. And yet, for reasons he could not name, the image of Claire standing in his office, defiant and trembling, would not leave his mind. Down below, in a city that never really slept, 2 strangers were now bound together by a deal neither fully understood. What began as strategy had already started to feel like consequence. 3 days later, Claire stood before the wide glass doors of Ward Manor, the sprawling estate that now served as her new home. The chauffeur had driven her through miles of perfectly trimmed hedges and fountains that glimmered under the morning sun. The mansion was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that made her heartbeat sound too loud. Ethan appeared at the top of the grand staircase, every step measured, his expression unreadable. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ward," he said, his tone polite but distant. A team of staff stood behind him, lined up like an army awaiting orders. Claire nodded stiffly, unsure if she should thank him or apologize for existing. One of the maids stepped forward and took her small suitcase, the same one she had carried since her hotel days. It looked out of place against the marble floor. Ethan gestured toward a set of double doors. "Your room is down that hall, the last on the right." Mine is at the opposite end. We will maintain separate quarters for privacy. We will appear together only when required. Claire managed a quiet, understood. As he turned away, she called after him. Mr. Ward, why me? Why not someone from your own world? He paused, his back still to her. Because someone from my world would have sold this story by now. You will not. Then he walked away, leaving her standing in the echo of his footsteps. That night, Claire explored her new room, a space larger than her entire apartment. A balcony overlooked the river, and the bed was dressed in linen so soft it felt unreal. But beneath the luxury was an emptiness she could not name. On the vanity, a single envelope waited. Inside was the printed itinerary for the week: charity gala, press dinner, board luncheon. Each event came with notes on what to wear and what not to say. At the bottom, a handwritten line in Ethan's precise penmanship: remember, silence is protection. She exhaled sharply, closing the envelope. Silence again. It seemed to follow her everywhere. The next evening, her first public test arrived. The charity gala filled the downtown ballroom with glittering light and the hum of conversation. Cameras flashed as guests in designer gowns floated through the crowd. Claire's palms were damp beneath her satin gloves as she stood beside Ethan, smiling for photographs. His arm rested lightly at her back, a practiced gesture of possession. She could feel the stiffness in his body, the tension behind every polite smile. Across the room, reporters murmured, whispering guesses about the mysterious wife of the elusive billionaire. Claire caught fragments: hotel clerk, arranged deal, temporary marriage. Her stomach tightened. She wanted to vanish. Then, from a nearby table, a voice sliced through the chatter. It was Veronica Hale, a board member known for her sharp tongue and sharper jewelry. So this is Mrs. Ward, she said with a smirk. Tell me, dear, how does it feel to go from cleaning rooms to owning them? A few people laughed softly, waiting for Claire to crumble. Ethan's jaw tightened. He was about to step in, but Claire spoke first, her voice steady. It feels exactly the same, Mrs. Hale, she said. A clean room is a reflection of discipline, and I suppose that is what keeps a householder, a company standing. The laughter stopped. The silence that followed was louder than any insult. Veronica's smile faltered. Ethan's eyes turned toward Claire, surprise flickering for just a moment before he schooled his features back into calm. He leaned close and whispered, nicely handled. Claire kept her eyes forward. I told you, Mr. Ward. I may be quiet, but I am not invisible. The rest of the evening moved like a dream. They danced once for the cameras, a slow waltz under the chandeliers. His hand rested against her waist, hers on his shoulder, both of them performing perfection. But somewhere between the music and the lights, Ethan's expression softened. He looked at her, not the contract wife, not the strategy, but the woman who refused to shrink. When the night ended, he escorted her to the car in silence. At the door, he said quietly, You handled yourself with grace tonight. Claire gave a small smile. I did not follow clause 4. Ethan's mouth twitched, almost a smile. No, you did not. Perhaps the contract needs revision. For the first time, they both laughed, a sound that startled them equally. In that fleeting moment, something shifted between them, fragile yet undeniably a crack in the wall they had both built. By the following week, the uneasy rhythm of their contract marriage had become routine. Every morning Claire would descend the marble staircase to find Ethan already at the dining table, his laptop open, his breakfast untouched. He would nod politely, ask about her schedule, and return to his work. Their conversations were civil but hollow, as if both feared saying something that might sound too real. Yet small, unplanned moments began to soften the edges between them. One afternoon, when a thunderstorm rolled over the city, Claire found herself alone in the library, the sound of rain tapping against the tall windows. She reached for a book on the highest shelf, and it slipped from her grasp. Before she could react, a hand caught it midair. Ethan stood beside her, close enough that she could smell the faint scent of cedar and rain on his shirt. You should ask for help next time, he said quietly. She smiled faintly. I have been taking care of myself for a long time, Mr. Ward. His gaze lingered for a moment longer than necessary before he placed the book in her hands. Maybe that is what needs to change, he said, and walked away. That night, they attended a board dinner at the private club downtown. The chandeliers glowed low and golden, reflecting in glasses of wine and the sharp glint of ambition. Claire sat beside Ethan as discussions about mergers and market shares swirled around her. She felt invisible again until a young assistant accidentally spilled red wine across her pale dress. Gasps rippled through the table, the waiter rushed forward, stammering apologies. Claire rose calmly, dabbing the stain with a napkin. It is just a dress, she said softly. Accidents happen. Across the table, an older executive murmured, her composure is remarkable. Ethan heard it too, his expression unreadable but his voice firm when he spoke. Indeed, it is. She has more dignity than most people I know in this room. The comment silenced the whispers. When they returned to the car, Claire glanced out the window, watching city lights smear against the glass. You did not have to defend me, she said. Ethan kept his eyes on the road. I did not defend you. I told the truth. The words hung between them, warm and dangerous. Days passed, and the media began to praise their chemistry. Photographs of them at events appeared on magazine covers with headlines calling them the power couple of the year. But behind closed doors, reality was quieter. They were two people learning to breathe in the same space, still bound by a contract neither wanted to admit felt increasingly fragile. One evening, Ethan invited her to accompany him on a visit to the community center funded by his foundation. It was a place he had rarely shown to anyone. As they walked through the modest halls, Claire noticed the photographs on the walls: children learning, families being treated in small clinics, volunteers cooking meals. Her voice softened. You built all of this? Ethan nodded. My parents started it. The board wants to shut it down because it is not profitable. The marriage was meant to buy me time, to protect it until I can transfer ownership. Claire turned to him, surprised. So this contract was never about you. It was about them. For the first time, he met her eyes fully. Everything I do is about them. Claire felt something shift inside her, a tenderness she did not expect. He was not the cold billionaire she thought she knew. He was a man trying to hold on to something good in a world obsessed with profit. When they left, the rain had stopped. The air was clean, carrying the faint scent of wet asphalt. Ethan opened the car door for her, and as she stepped in, she looked up at him and said, "Maybe you are not as heartless as you pretend to be." He smiled, just barely. "Do not tell anyone. I have a reputation to keep." The drive back to Ward Manor was silent, but it was a silence that no longer felt suffocating. It was a fragile peace, the beginning of something unspoken. That night, Claire stood by her window, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars. Somewhere down the hall, she could hear Ethan's footsteps pause outside her door. For a moment, she thought he might knock. But he did not. The sound faded, leaving her alone with the quiet realization that this contract had already begun to change both of them in ways neither could control. The following month arrived with a rush of obligations. The city buzzed with anticipation for Ward Enterprises' annual press gala, a grand event attended by shareholders, politicians, and every journalist eager to catch a headline. Claire had been fitted into a deep navy gown, elegant and understated, her hair swept into soft waves. As she looked at herself in the mirror, she could barely recognize the woman staring back. The maid complimented her appearance, but Claire only nodded, her mind somewhere else. Downstairs, Ethan waited in a charcoal tuxedo, his expression calm yet watchful. When their eyes met, there was a moment of silence that said more than words could. "Ready?" he asked. Claire took a breath. "As ready as I will ever be." The drive to the venue was quiet, filled with the hum of tires against wet pavement. When they stepped out, camera flashes exploded around them like fireworks. Claire's hand trembled slightly as Ethan offered his arm. He leaned closer and whispered, "Remember, just smile. You are safe." They walked into the ballroom together, a vision of perfection under the chandeliers. Reporters called out questions, but Ethan guided her smoothly past them, his hand steady at her back. Inside, the room shimmered with gold and crystal. Laughter mixed with the clinking of glasses. For an hour, they played their parts flawlessly. Claire greeted guests, accepted compliments, and delivered polite smiles that never reached her eyes. Ethan remained close, speaking with investors while occasionally glancing her way. But peace rarely lasted long in his world. Midway through dinner, Veronica Hale, the same board member who had humiliated Claire before, approached with a gleam in her eye and a microphone in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced loudly, "I believe our newest Mrs. Ward has yet to give a toast." The crowd turned toward Claire expectantly. Ethan froze. This was not planned. Claire felt the air tighten around her. The rule echoed in her mind: Clause 4, do not speak unless addressed. Veronica's smirk widened. "Come now, Mrs. Ward, tell us what it is like being the most envied woman in Chicago." Claire's throat went dry. She could see Ethan's warning glance, subtle but firm. The cameras were rolling. Every second stretched painfully. Then, something inside her rebelled against the silence she had been forced to wear like a collar. She stood, lifting her glass. Her voice, calm but strong, carried across the ballroom. "It feels like pressure," she said. "It feels like standing in borrowed light, trying not to burn." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "But if there is one thing I have learned, it is that power without purpose means nothing. And I am proud to stand beside a man who still believes in using his for something good." The room went quiet. Ethan's gaze softened, his eyes flickering with surprise and something close to admiration. Veronica forced a smile, clearly unsettled. "Well said, dear," she muttered before retreating into the crowd. The evening continued, but something fundamental had changed. Reporters whispered about Claire's composure, her honesty, her unexpected grace. Later, as the night wound down, Ethan found her on the balcony, looking out at the glittering skyline. "You broke the rule again," he said quietly. She did not look away. "I told the truth." Ethan studied her face, the reflection of city lights dancing in her eyes. "You have a habit of turning my plans upside down, Mrs. Ward." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe you need better plans." For the first time, he laughed, a sound rare and unguarded. They stood together in comfortable silence, the cold wind tugging at her hair. Beneath the glitter and the pretense, something real had begun to grow between them. It was fragile, complicated, and far from the contract they had signed, but it was there all the same. When they finally left the event, Ethan offered his hand as she stepped into the car. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. The contact was brief but electric, a quiet acknowledgement of a bond neither of them could explain. As the city lights blurred past, Ethan glanced at her reflection in the window and thought, for the first time in years, that silence no longer felt like safety, it felt like loss. The night after the gala, the mansion felt different. The usual silence between Claire and Ethan had softened, replaced by a quiet awareness neither dared to name. In the morning, Claire walked into the kitchen to find Ethan making coffee himself, something she had never seen before. He glanced up and said, "Good morning, Mrs. Ward." She smiled slightly. "I did not know you knew how to use a coffee machine." His lips curved faintly. "I own half of them. It would be embarrassing if I did not." She laughed, a sound that startled them both. It was small, but it broke the tension that had lingered between them for weeks. For the first time, their breakfast was not filled with polite silence. They talked about little things: the smell of rain, the city traffic, her mother's recovery. Ethan listened, really listened, and Claire noticed the sharpness in his tone had softened. When she mentioned she missed working, he said simply, "Then find something worth doing. You do not need permission." That night, as she stood on the balcony, Ethan joined her with 2 mugs of tea. The skyline shimmered below like a field of stars. "You are thinking about leaving," he said quietly. She turned to him, surprised. "Why would you say that?" "Because you look like someone planning an escape." Claire hesitated, her breath visible in the cold air. "This marriage," she said softly, "it was supposed to be a performance. But sometimes, when you look at me like that, I forget where the act ends." Ethan's expression flickered, a crack in his calm. He set the mug down and said, "Maybe it does not have to end." Before she could respond, a gust of wind rattled the balcony doors, pulling them both back to reality. The next few days were filled with subtle shifts. Claire began helping the foundation team with outreach projects, reviewing reports, and meeting volunteers. She discovered how passionate she felt about the work, and the staff started to admire her quiet leadership. One afternoon, Ethan found her in the office surrounded by papers. "You are supposed to be my cover, not my replacement," he teased. Claire smiled without looking up. "Someone has to make sure you do not forget why you started this." He leaned against the doorway, watching her, a strange warmth stirring in his chest. For years, he had lived in a world of power and precision, but around her, he felt something unfamiliar: peace. That evening, they attended a smaller charity event, far from the flashing cameras and polished boardrooms. It was held in a modest community center, the same one she had visited with him before. The lights flickered slightly, the floor creaked under old wood, and yet the place was alive with laughter. As they handed out food to families, Claire caught Ethan watching her again, his eyes soft, unguarded. "What are you thinking?" she asked quietly. He shook his head, smiling faintly. "That I have spent years building empires, and somehow she gestured to the people, the laughter, her feels like the only thing that matters." Claire felt her heart twist in a way that frightened her. She looked away, pretending to focus on her task. Later that night, on the drive home, rain began to fall again, steady and cold. The car's interior glowed softly from the dashboard lights. Claire stared out the window, her reflection merging with the blurred city. Ethan's voice broke the silence. "When this is over, when the contract ends, what will you do?" She hesitated. "I do not know. Maybe go back to work, live quietly." He nodded. "And if I asked you to stay?" Her heart raced, but she forced her tone steady. "Do not ask me that unless you mean it." The car fell silent again, but the air between them was charged. When they reached the mansion, Ethan opened her door, but neither moved. For a long moment, they simply stood under the awning as rain poured down. Finally, he said softly, "You changed everything, Claire. You should know that." She looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then why are you still afraid to listen to your own heart?" He did not answer. The rain filled the silence instead. Inside, the contract that once defined their boundaries now sat on Ethan's desk, its ink beginning to blur from the moisture in the air, a silent symbol of how fragile walls become when feelings start to grow. The following week began like any other, but it did not take long for the calm to shatter. Early Monday morning, Ethan was summoned to an emergency board meeting. Claire waited at home, unaware that her name had just become the centerpiece of a scandal. Across every financial news outlet, leaked documents appeared, copies of their marriage contract. Headlines screamed, "Billionaire Ethan Ward buys his wife." The story spread like wildfire. By noon, cameras gathered outside Ward Manor, reporters shouting questions through the iron gates. Inside, Claire watched the television in shock. The document was real, her signature visible for the world to see. Her chest tightened. Who would do this? When Ethan returned, his face was grim, his tie loosened as if he had fought a war. "The board demanded answers," he said sharply. "Someone leaked the contract, and they are using it to push for my resignation." Claire rose from the couch, her voice trembling. "Then tell them the truth. Tell them it was your idea, that it was business." Ethan's tone hardened. "If I do that, they will destroy you. The press already calls you a gold digger. If I confirm the contract, they will make you their headline villain." I will not allow that. She shook her head, tears welling. You are protecting your company, not me. You said silence was protection, but it has only ever protected you. His eyes flashed with frustration, but there was pain behind it. I am trying to fix this. Claire stepped closer, her voice breaking. You cannot fix what was never honest to begin with. She turned and walked out of the room before he could stop her. That night, the mansion that once felt too big now felt suffocating. Paparazzi lights flickered through the curtains like lightning. Claire packed a small bag, the same one she had arrived with. She left her ring on the dresser beside the blurred contract, the symbol of everything that had gone wrong. Outside, rain began to fall again, washing over the stone steps as she disappeared into the night. Ethan stood by the window, staring at the ring long after she was gone. For the first time, he felt powerless. The next morning, the headlines grew worse. Investors pulled out, accusing Ethan of fraud and moral misconduct. A board member named Graham Foster publicly called for a vote to remove him as CEO. The world was tearing apart the empire he had spent his life building. But none of it hurt as much as the empty silence of the house. Meanwhile, Claire stayed at a modest inn downtown, far from the flashing lights. Her phone buzzed non-stop with messages she refused to read. Alone in the quiet room, she stared at the newsfeed showing Ethan surrounded by cameras. He looked older, worn, defeated. Despite everything, her heart ached. She whispered to herself, I should have spoken sooner. I should have told them the truth. But she was not ready to face him, not yet. Outside, thunder rolled across the city, and somewhere between pride and heartbreak, both of them realized that their silence had finally turned against them. 2 days later, the Ward Enterprises shareholders convened for the most critical vote in the company's history. The media swarmed the headquarters, hungry for drama, their cameras fixed on the glass doors where Ethan Ward would stand trial before the world. Inside the boardroom, tension hung like smoke. The executives sat in silence as Graham Foster, the man who had orchestrated the leak, stood at the head of the table. Ethan Ward, he said with a practiced sneer, the evidence is clear. You used company resources for personal gain, fabricated a marriage to manipulate public image, and violated shareholder trust. Effective today, the board will vote on your removal as chief executive officer. The words sliced through the room. Ethan said nothing at first. He simply looked around at the faces that had once called him visionary, now cold with betrayal. Then, just as Graham prepared to proceed, the double doors burst open. Claire stood there, soaked from the rain, her hair clinging to her cheeks, eyes blazing with determination. Every camera turned. Reporters outside caught the moment instantly. Mrs. Ward, Graham said mockingly, how fitting you appear just in time to witness your husband's downfall. Claire's voice, though soft, carried through the room. I am not here to watch his downfall. I am here to stop it. She stepped forward, placing a stack of papers on the table. These are payment receipts from Ward Foundation, dated before the marriage contract. Ethan did not buy me. He helped me when no one else would. The money paid for my mother's treatment, not my silence. The board members exchanged glances. Graham frowned. You expect us to believe this is not a publicity stunt? Claire met his gaze fearlessly. I expect you to believe the truth. I married Ethan because he needed protection for something far greater than himself. He did this to save your foundation, the same one that funds the clinics and education programs you now pretend do not exist. Her words struck like thunder. Reporters whispered, cameras flashed, and for the first time, the board's confidence faltered. Ethan rose slowly, his voice low but firm. You wanted a scandal, Graham. You got one. The scandal is not the contract. It is the greed that forced me to sign it. The foundation stays, or I go public with every detail of your corruption. The room erupted. Graham's face drained of color. Before anyone could respond, the chairman of the board raised his hand. Enough, he said. This meeting is adjourned. The vote will be postponed pending investigation. As security escorted Graham out, the reporters followed, shouting questions. Ethan turned toward Claire, his eyes unreadable. "You should not have come," he said quietly. She smiled through her tears. Someone had to remind them that truth still matters. He looked at her for a long moment, his composure breaking. The storm outside thundered as he whispered, "You just saved everything." She shook her head. "No, Ethan. We saved it." The cameras flashed again, capturing the moment they stood side by side, no longer CEO and contract bride, but two people who had finally chosen honesty over fear. Outside, the rain began to slow, washing the city clean. For the first time in weeks, silence no longer felt like punishment, it felt like peace. Weeks passed, and the chaos that once surrounded their names slowly began to fade. The board completed its investigation, clearing Ethan of all charges. Graham Foster resigned in disgrace, his empire of manipulation collapsing under the weight of truth. Ward Enterprises regained its stability, and the foundation once at risk received record donations after the story of Claire's courage spread. Yet despite the public victory, Ethan and Claire had not spoken since that day in the boardroom. She had returned to her modest apartment, choosing quiet over attention. Her mother was recovering well, and every morning sunlight spilled across the small kitchen table where Claire sipped her coffee and tried to convince herself she was content. But every time she glanced at the empty chair across from her, she knew she was lying. One evening, there was a knock at the door. When she opened it, Ethan stood there, no security, no driver, just the man she once married for reasons neither fully understood. He held an envelope in his hand. "I came to return this," he said. It was the original contract, edges slightly worn, the ink faded. Claire stared at it, her heart tightening. "You could have just mailed it." Ethan smiled faintly. "I needed to see you open it." Inside, the document had been crossed through with thick black lines, every clause voided. At the bottom, in his handwriting, were 4 words: "No more silence. No more rules." Claire looked up at him, tears glimmering. "What does this mean?" "It means I am done hiding," Ethan said. "The company is safe, the foundation is yours as much as mine, and for the first time, I want something that is not built on fear. I want you." She covered her mouth, struggling to find words. "You said this marriage began as a performance." He stepped closer, his voice steady. "Then let us make it real." For a moment, the world outside disappeared, the noise, the cameras, the expectations. There was only the quiet rhythm of rain beginning to fall again, just like the night they first met. Ethan took her hand, pressing something into her palm. It was the same simple silver ring from the contract, but now, the inside was engraved with 2 small words chosen freely. Claire's tears fell as she whispered, "Are you sure?" He nodded. "More sure than I have ever been about anything." She slipped the ring back onto her finger, and for the first time, it felt like it belonged there. In that small apartment, without the grandeur of the mansion or the flash of photographers, they began again not as CEO and contract bride, but as equals. Outside, the rain washed over the city, soft and endless, a promise of renewal. The story that began as a transaction ended as something far rarer, a love built not on wealth or silence, but on truth, kindness, and choice. And from that day forward, Ethan and Claire Ward were never silent again.